Seeking Daylight Part 1 Journey to the Underhill Gates. Narrated by Million Quinteros. Chapter 10 Moonflower and Primrose. Lewis dreamed only of darkness, an odd thing for him. He had dreamed every night of his life, or at least as far back as he could remember. He dreamed vividly, in colors brighter than those in the real world. Those dreams had become like a second life for him, a world that was his and his alone. Many of them returned to him again and again like old friends, or a favorite movie that showed before his eyes. There were some, many, that he already knew the endings to, but enjoyed just the same. At Grandpa Andy's suggestion, Lewis had begun a dream journal in the second grade. One particular dream had played in his mind far more nights than the others. That dream had raised some questions. It was of a man, cloaked in black. Lewis never could quite make out his face, but he could feel the man watching over him as he was in various states of distress. In one dream, Lewis remembered that he was being chased by a pack of dogs. In another, he had struggled to keep his head above water as he rushed down a river and toward a raging waterfall. The man never helped Lewis, not outright, but his presence in the dream always made Lewis feel safe, no matter what type of trouble he might have found himself in. He was awake now. He could tell, if only by the dull and pounding ache that he felt in his head. He made a feeble attempt at opening his eyes. They had swollen considerably, it seemed. All he could manage was to peel his left lid open just a tiny crack. He was barely out of that dreamless darkness, conscious just long enough to taste something peculiar in his mouth, like he had eaten a handful of grass or a strange weed. Then everything went black once again. This time when Lewis awoke, his headache felt a bit better, and the ringing in his ears had all but disappeared. His eyes were still swollen though, and his head still groggy. He strained his eyes open as best he could. He wanted to see if Sophie and Owen were all right, but lifting his head was impossible, as was speaking. As he lay there, he could just barely see what was directly in front of him. At the moment, his view was of the flowing stream some 10 or so feet away. Wretched poison! From behind him, he felt footsteps. They made their way around front of him until suddenly, standing just before his eyes, he made out what appeared to be a pair of bright orange shoes. He wanted to scream out to the others, but again he found himself all but mute. He felt something being shoved into his mouth just between his gum and cheek. There was that taste of grass again. Darkness. This time Lewis did dream. In fact, he dreamed what it seemed to be every dream he ever had or could remember having, one right after the other, all as if in a continuous movie reel flickering on the backs of his eyes. The dreams helped him to keep track of the time, sort of. He knew only for sure that he certainly had never been asleep for so long in his life. When his eyes finally opened this time, he felt no pain in his head, no ringing in his ears, and he slowly was able to sit himself upright on the dirt floor. "There he is!" Sophie's cheerful voice said from behind him. Before he could turn to see her, Owen's big hands reached under his arms and helped him to his feet. Lewis struggled to stay upright, his legs wobbling like a newborn fawn standing for the very first time.
"Oh, was I out?"
Lewis asked his friend, who held Lewis's arm to steady him as he gained his footing.
"It's hard to tell down here, but it's been days. I'm sure of that. We were really starting to get worried, man. Where's Sophie? She okay?"
Lewis wobbled a little and was slurring his words. Owen stayed by him, holding him up just enough by his arm so that he could regain his balance on his own.
"Better than ever. She's right over there by the fire. Now let's get you some grub and water, shall we?"
Owen kept hold of Lewis's arm as he slowly helped him turn away from the stream that had gotten him into this mess. Lewis smelled the smoke from the embers, and as he turned, could see that Sophie was sitting on a log by the small fire pit. There was a tiny, black cast-iron pot sitting in the coals. She seemed quite content there as she warmed herself and poked the fire with a stick. As they approached the warming glow of the fire, she leapt to her feet, giving Lewis a hug in place of the normal greeting that he had grown accustomed to, usually a punch in the arm or some crass comment.
"I'm glad you're feeling better, Louie."
She smiled and led Lewis by the hand to where she had been sitting and helped him to take a seat on the log.
"Here, let's get you some food. You must be starving."
As she lifted the top from the pot, the smell of whatever was cooking got Lewis's stomach rumbling. It smelled delicious, of potatoes and peppers and spices. Sophie ladled some into a small stone bowl with a tiny spoon and handed it to him.
Careful now, it's hot.
Louis blew onto the soup, looked appreciatively toward Sophie, and lifted the bowl upward to his lips. It was all he could do to not gulp the entire thing down in an instant. Where she had found the pot for cooking or the ingredients to make the soup mattered little to him at this particular moment. He was starving from his long slumber, and the warm soup tasted more amazing than it had any right to. As he lowered the bowl from his face, an odd little man stared back right at him, his large emerald eyes inspecting Louis closely before he spoke.
Good to have you back, my boy. You are a lucky one. Lucky indeed.
Startled, Louis fell backward off the log he had been sitting on and blew soup through his nose, making him cough uncontrollably. Owen rushed to his aid, grabbing Louis and propping him back upright and onto the log again. Louis was speechless.
That's Morgo, Owen explained. He helped you to get your strength back. He helped all of us. Not a bad cook either, huh?
Louis had to pinch himself to be sure he wasn't still dreaming. What was this man doing here? Where did he come from? He was so small, so wiry. Owen dwarfed him in comparison, even though the man must have been at least 4 times his elder.
Lucky for you the moonflower and primrose were in bloom. It's the only cure for what ailed you, my boy. Only the flowers that bloom in the darkness could bring you from yours.
Louis flinched as the man stretched his hand toward his face.
Easy now. Let me have a look at you.
Sophie rubbed Louis's back assuredly, and Louis was able to relax, if only a bit, as the man pressed upward on his eyelids one at a time, holding them open so as to inspect him further.
Good. Good,
Morgo said to himself, patting Louis on the arm once he was satisfied with whatever he had been looking for.
Eat your soup, my boy. You will need your strength. We have a whole day's journey ahead of us now. We'll leave by first light of the flash flies.
Louis obliged, taking another sip of the soup from his bowl. He could feel it flowing through his extremities, giving him energy. He kept the man in sight from the corner of his eye the entire time, watching him as he tended to the fire and began to rummage through a large green sack that he had set just next to the fire pit. As Louis finished his meal, he noticed the man was wearing a pair of worn orange shoes like those he had seen before. His stomach now full, Louis spoke up and in the direction of the little man.
How did you get here? I mean, how did you find us? I should ask you the same,
the man fired back.
This is my station, my patrol, and my home.
He sounded rather annoyed.
I have not seen the likes of your kind here in quite a many seasons.
The man reached into his bag and pulled from it the triangular medallion that Sophie had been wearing around her neck before, the cipher that had helped them to break the code.
Your friends tell me that you have visited the telling tree, eh? That has been locked away for quite some time. No one around here has seen much use in it, not since the seer ran off on us to the above.
Give that here, Louis shouted as he grabbed for the medallion, but Morgo just pulled it away and inspected it closely in his slender fingers. That's mine. Where are my other things?
Don't you worry, my boy. It's all packed away safe and sound, just as it was when I found you here.
He walked over to Sophie and slipped the medallion over her head, hanging it around her neck once again.
I have no use for your trinkets.
What do you mean the above? Do you know the way home? Owen interjected. We are quite clearly lost. Morgo interrupted him.
Lost? Dear boy, you are not any more lost than I am. Those fools.
He pointed upward, waving his finger in a semicircle as if to point to anyone who lived above.
Those fools are the lost ones. Not me. That much I know for certain.
Maybe so, but we would like to go back home just the same, Sophie piped in. Morgo appeared amused by such bravado, coming from such a tiny thing. Tiny, at least, when compared to Louis or Owen. She stood at equal height with Morgo.
Is that so, little flash fly? Well, then home is where I will take you. We will need help, though, of course. It is a long journey to the above from here. Dangerous. Treacherous. Far too treacherous for the 4 of us to make it alone. First, I will take you to see the others. We will rest our legs, fill our bellies, and replenish our supplies. Then we will make the journey. Then we will get you back to the daylight.
There was little that any of them could say in protest. They were tired, lost, and unaware of such things as rivers that would put you to sleep for days on end if you were foolish enough to take a drink from them. Morgo was a peculiar little fellow. That went without saying much about it. But he had found them, fed them, and helped them to gain their strength again. That certainly had to be considered. Yet Lewis couldn't help but think that there was something more to this Morgo, something that he wasn't telling them. They would go with him for now, but Lewis was going to be sure that he watched his back and those of his friends, especially now that they would be traveling with this odd little stranger. The first of the flash flies blinked as it flew toward them, its light a bright baby blue. Then they noticed a red one and a green one, each finding a place to rest their wings in one of the trees that had lined their path. Soon they could see their way into the distance once again. The four of them hurried to pack their things. Owen was given the task of stomping out the small fire and was given some extra weight to carry for Morgo, though it was hardly noticeable for him. Lewis grabbed for his walking stick, but Morgo pulled it from its resting place before he had the chance. He twisted it in his fingers, carefully inspecting it until he was satisfied.
How did a boy such as you get your hands on such a fine walking stick?
Lewis tried to reach for it, but the little man pulled it away from Lewis, causing him to grasp nothing but air. Morgo looked down the stick's edge, twisting as he did so.
I have not seen a walking stick this true in quite a many years, my boy. Quite the stick indeed. Quite the stick indeed,
he repeated to himself. Lewis finally grabbed it from Morgo and held it close. My father left it for me to have, and I would appreciate it if you kept your hands away from it.
Quite a nice gift. Your father must know a thing or two about walking sticks, I would say.
His big green eyes lingered on it a moment longer than was comfortable to Lewis before Morgo turned away, quite all of a sudden, and began walking ahead of the others. Sophie and Owen followed as Lewis tried his best to keep close to his friends as they began their journey down the long, illuminated pathway. Where they were going? No one was quite sure. Can't wait to find out what happens next? No problem. You can grab the first 2 complete books now for free by visiting pjowen.com/free.